CHIJ St. Nicholas Girls School, Primary 5 Mathematics 2025, weighted assessment, term 2. In question 1, we're given that Kaylee had 94 tulips and 87 roses at first. She then bought an equal number of tulips and roses. In the end, she had a total of 359 flowers. How many tulips did Kaylee buy? Okay, so in this question, we're given like a before, change, after. So in this case, what we have before is the individual tulips and roses, and then we're given a change. And in this case, the change is bought an equal number of tulips and roses. And lastly, they tell us what we have left in the end, which is a total of 359 flowers. So I'm going to express this in a before, change, after. So what we have before is tulips is 94, the roses is 87, and then in this case it's a change, so we use the arrow to represent change. Okay, and since because they bought an equal number, but we don't know how many, so in this case we represent it as tulip plus question mark, and then our roses also plus question mark. And then what we have left at the end is a total of 359. So at the end is a tulips plus roses equals to 359 flowers in total. So in this case, after we represent our before, change, after, we will realize that in order to find our change, which is how many tulips did Kaylee buy, which is this one, first we can find what we have in total at first. So total at first will be 94 plus 87, which is 181. So this is the total at first. And then what we have at the end is 359. So in this case, to find the change, how many tulips and roses did she buy? We'll be taking what you have total at the end, which is 359, minus your total at first, which is 181. So 359 minus 181 will give you 178. So in this case, we know our change is 178. And in this case, because they bought an equal number of tulips and roses, so to find the tulips, we can just take 178, which is our change. We divide by 2. So 178 divided by 2 will give you 89. So in this case, the answer for question 1, how many tulips did Katie buy, is 89. Okay, now I'll move on to question 2. Mrs. Chan bought 10 meters of ribbon. She used 4.5 meters to decorate some cushion covers and 1 3/5 meters to tie some presents. How much ribbon did Mrs. Chan have left? So in this case, the fractions we are given, this 4.5 meters and this 1 3/5 meters, these are all given in terms of a value. Okay, so value meaning with the like units at the back, so like a meters, a centimeters, etc. Okay, so in this case, we know our total at first is 10 meters, and then she used 4.5 meters to decorate some cushion covers. So after using that 4.5 meters, she'll be left with 10 minus 4.5 meters. So in this case, for this, when we take 10 minus 4.5, we will need to borrow 1 whole from 10. So in this case, 10 you borrow 1 whole will become 9 wholes, and 2 out of 2, then minus your 4.5. So in this case, 9 minus 4, you end up with 5, and 2 minus 1, you end up with 1. So 5.5. So this is what you left after she used to decorate the cushion covers. Then next, she used 1 3/5 meters to tie some presents. So what we have left after decorating the cushion covers, which is 5.5, subtract away the amount used to, or the length that we used to tie the present, which is 1 3/5. Okay, so in this question, we have sorry, not in this question. For this step, right, you realize that you have actually 2 unlike fractions. So what you should do first is to go and make the denominators the same. So in this case, the denominator is 2 and 5. So the lowest common multiple of 2 and 5 is 10. So for this 5.5, we need to multiply by 5 to both numerator and denominator. And then for this 3/5, we need to multiply by 2 to both numerator and denominator. So what we'll end up with is 5 and 5 over 10 minus 1 and 6 over 10. So once again, you realize that 5 over 10 cannot minus 6 over 10. So it means you need to borrow 1 whole from 5. So in this case, 5 you minus 1 whole, you're left with 4. And then it's 10 out of 10 plus your 5 out of 10. So you will have 15 out of 10 minus your 1 and 6 over 10. So in this case, 4 minus 1, you're left with 3. 15 over 10 minus 6 over 10, you'll be left with 9 over 10. So your answer to this question, how much ribbon did Mrs. Chan have left, is 3 and 9 over 10 meters. Okay. Next question. Find the perimeter of the figure below. All line meets at right angles. Okay. For this question, there is some missing information that the question did not provide. So in this case, this 4 centimeters here, this line here that is marked with the stroke, is equals to this line here, which is also means that it's 4 centimeters as well. Okay, so without this information, you probably wouldn't be able to solve the question. So please add this information in. Okay, so now how can we solve this question? So to find the perimeter of the whole figure, we're going to use something called the push-out method. So in this case, what we have this line here, which is the perimeter of the figure, we can actually shift it upwards to this point here. And this portion here, we can also shift it upwards to this portion here. So this kind of forms the length of the rectangle, which is the 20 centimeters. And then for the side as well, this portion here, we can actually shift it upwards to here. And this portion here, we can also shift it upwards to form an entire rectangle. Okay, so it will look something like this. This is the entire rectangle. So in this case, like I mentioned previously, this here is 4 cm, here will be 4 centimeters as well. So in order to find the breadth of the figure, we will have to take 11 cm plus 4 cm, which gives me 15 cm. So this length here is, or this breadth here is 15 cm. So to find the whole perimeter of the figure, we will just have to add the length and the breadth. So in this case, 20 plus 15 plus 20 plus 15. And if you were to add it up, you will get 70 centimeters. So 70 centimeters. Okay, let's move on to the next question, question 4. So for question 4, the rectangle and the square below have the same perimeter. So in this case, we are given the length and the breadth of the rectangle, and we want to find the length of the square for part A. So since they both have the same perimeter, we'll find the perimeter of the rectangle first. So the perimeter of the rectangle would be 14 plus 6 plus 14 plus 6, okay, which is 40 centimeters. And since the rectangle and square has the same perimeter, the perimeter of the square is also 40 centimeters. So to find the side of the square, and if you know the perimeter, we'll just be taking the perimeter divided by the 4 sides of the square, the 4 equal sides of the square. So this will give me one side of the square, which is 10 centimeters. Okay, so for part A, the length of the square is 10 centimeters. Okay, then since we have found the length of the square, to find the area, you can just take the side times side, which is 10 times 10. Okay, this will give you 100. So your answer for part B, the area of the square is 100 square centimeters. Okay, question 5. There are 432 people at a concert. 5/8 of the people are adults, and 1/6 of the people are boys, and the rest are girls. So 158 of the adults are men. How many women are there at the concert? So in this case, we know the fraction of the people that are adults. So we can proceed to find how many adults there are at the concert. So in this case, to find how many adults are at the concert, so we'll be taking the fraction of people that are adults, which is 5/8, multiplied by their total number of people at the concert, which is 432. So here we have a fraction multiplied by a whole number. So in this case, the denominator of the fraction can cancel with the whole number. So in this case, 8 and 432. 432 is a multiple of 8, so you can actually cancel. So the 8 will become 1, and this 432 will become 54. And then what we have left is just a 5/1 times 54, which will give me 270 adults. So if we know number of men as well, so the man is 158. How many women are there? So to find the woman, would be just taking the total number of adults, which is 270, subtract away the number of men, which is 158. So 270 minus 158, this will give you 112. So there's 112 women at the concert. For question 6, sorry, not question 6, question 5B, how many girls are there at the concert? So we are also given that 1/6 of the people are boys and the rest are girls. So in this case, we are able to find the number of boys as well. So to find the number of boys, we use the same method as above. In this case, we know the fraction of the people that are boys. So in this case, 1/6 multiplied by the total number of people, which is 432. So once again, we have a fraction multiplied by a whole number. So the denominator of the fraction can cancel with the whole number. And in this case, because 432 is a multiple of 6. So in this case, 6 you cancel become 1, and this 432 you can cancel to become 72. So essentially what you're left with is 1/1 times 72, which is 72. So there are 72 boys. So in this case, we know the number of adults, we know the number of boys, and the question states that the rest are girls. So in this case, to find the number of boys plus adults first would be to take the adults, which is 270 plus 72. This will give me 342 boys and adults. So 342 are boys and adults, and the rest are girls. So to find the number of girls would just be to take our total, which is the 432, subtract away the number of boys plus adults, which is 342. So this will be 90 girls. 90 girls for part B. Okay, let's move on to question 6 now. So the figure below is made up of 3 triangles, 1 square, and 1 rectangle. And they're given the area of the square D as an area of 121 square centimeters. So find the length of square D. So to find the area of the square is side times side, where the sides are equal. So in this case, 121 will be equals to blank times blank. And this blank have to be the same number. So if you were to press your calculator, you will realize that these two numbers would be 11 times 11. So it means the length of square D is 11 cm. Okay. And I'm going to fill this up in the diagram as well. So here is 11 cm. Here is 11 cm. Okay, and in this case, because we know this side of the square is the length of the rectangle as well. So this side of the rectangle here is also 11 cm. Okay, I'm just going to fill that in first. So next, we are going to find what is the height of the triangle B. So in this case, triangle B, you realize that if you look carefully, you realize that the height needs to be perpendicular to the base. So in this case, for triangle B, this 37 cm here will be your base, and your height would be this dotted line here. Okay. So in this case, this dotted line here is the same as this side of the whole figure. And what you have below here, this yellow portion here, is also the side of the square. So you know this dimension as well as 11 centimeters. Okay, so in order to find the green portion, which is the height of my triangle B, would be just to take the total length of the yellow plus green portion, which is 18 centimeters, minus away the yellow portion. So in this case, 18 minus 11, which equals to 7. So the height of triangle B is 7 centimeters. Okay, I'm going to fill this in the diagram as well. 7 centimeters for the height of triangle B. Okay, next for part C, what is the total area of triangle A and B? Okay, so in this case, we already figure out what is the base and height of triangle B. So now we look at triangle A to try to figure out the base and the height. So the base must be one side of the triangle. And since we know the yellow portion, which is the side of the triangle, which is 11 cm, so that would be your base. And in this case, now we want to determine the height of the triangle. So the heights must be perpendicular to the base. So if you were to draw it carefully, you realize that this blue portion here is your height. Okay. And then how do we find this length here? So how can we find this length here? Sorry. So we want to find this length here, this blue color portion here. Okay, how can we find this length here? So in this case, we can find the purple portion or the pink portion here. This portion, sorry. This portion here happens to be your 8 cm plus 11 cm, which is 19 cm. So 11 plus 8 to give you 19 centimeters. 19 centimeters. And then to find the question mark, will be just to take your total length, which is 37, minus away your 19 centimeters to give you okay, to give you 18 centimeters. So this question mark here is 18 centimeters, and it's the height of your triangle A. So to find the area of triangle A would be to take half times my base, which is 11 centimeters, times my height, which is 18 centimeters. Okay, sorry. So in this case, half times 11 times 18, if you put in your calculator, you will get 99. And then to find the area of triangle B would be to take half times the base, which is the 37 centimeters, multiplied by your height, which is 7 centimeters. So in this case, your area of triangle B would be 129.5. So to find the total area of A and B would be to take 99 plus 129.5, okay, which will give you 228.5. So the answer for this question will be 228.5 squared centimeters. Okay, next for question 7. The price of a box of chocolate is $18. For every 3 boxes of chocolate bought, the fourth box of chocolate is sold at half price. So one box costs $18. And then if you were to buy 3 boxes, you get the fourth box at half price. So Mira wants to buy 4 boxes of chocolate. How much money does she need to pay? So in this case, you buy 3 boxes at the original price. So 3 boxes would cost Mira 3 times of $18, which is $54. And then the fourth box is a half price. So to find the price of the fourth box, we'll be taking your original price, which is $18. So what's half of 18? It's 18 divided by 2, which is $9. So to find how much she pay, in this case, for 4 boxes of chocolates would be 54 plus 9, which is 63. So your answer for this question is 63. That's for part A. Okay, for part B, Derek bought some boxes of chocolates and paid $378. How many boxes of chocolates did he buy? So in this case, what we have in this box here, so I'm just going to highlight this whole box here, essentially is what we have inside one group, okay? So in one group, we have calculated in part A how much we pay for one group, which is a total of $63. So in this case, we know the total in one group from part A is $63. And for this question, Derek bought some boxes of chocolates and paid $378. So this 378 is a total. So in this case, we know the total and we know how much is it cost for one group of chocolates. So in this case, to find our number of groups would be to take our total, which is 378, divided by 63. This will give me 6 groups. Okay, so after we find a number of groups, how many boxes of chocolates did he buy? So we know that in one group, essentially, there is 4 boxes of chocolates. And then to find how many boxes did he buy in 6 groups, would be taking 6 multiplied by the number of boxes of chocolates in one group, which is 4. So the total number of chocolates he bought is 24. Okay, that is for part B. Okay, I'll move on to question 8 now. So at first, Aisha, Bianca, and Catrice had 780 beats altogether. So Aisha gave 38 beats to Bianca. Aisha had 3 times as many beats as Bianca. Then Catrice had 20 more beats than Bianca in the end. So how many beats did Bianca have at first? Okay, so once again, we're given like a before, change, after type of question. So how much they have at first, which is a total, and then a change where Aisha gave 38 beats to Bianca, and then what they have at the end, which is Aisha had 3 times as many beats as Bianca, and Catrice 20 more beats than Bianca. So we can express this in the before, change, after, as a before, change, after. So what they have at first is a total. So A plus B plus C is 780 beats at first. And in this case, there is a change. So I'm going to use the arrow to represent change. So Aisha gave 38 beats to Bianca. So Aisha minus A minus 38 beats, and then the Bianca, which is B, plus 38 beats. And then what they have left at the end is Aisha 3 times as many beats as Bianca. So I can draw the comparison model between Aisha and Bianca. So Aisha will be 3 units, and then this Bianca would be 1 unit. And then Catrice had 20 more beats than Bianca. So in this case, for your Catrice would be bigger than the Bianca. And in this case, how much extra is, what's the difference is 20. So what you should do next, right? It's kind of probably to try to understand the question better and try to figure out is what kind of transfer is this. In this case, it is Aisha gave to Bianca. So in this case, it's like a case of internal transfer. And in this case, because Aisha minus 38 and Bianca plus 38, so in this case, the total remains unchanged. So in this case, it is an unchanged total question. Okay, so our total at first is 780. So what we have left at the end here, it is also 780 as well. Okay, so next we have to figure out how many beats did Bianca have at first. Okay, so we work with what we have left at the end, which is we know that the total is 780. So in this case, if we were to remove the difference of 20 from Catrice, so if we were to remove this portion here of 20 for Catrice, and then we would be left with actually 3 units for Aisha, 1 unit for Bianca, and 1 unit for Catrice, so total 5 units. So in this case, 5 units would be 780 minus 20, which is 760. So 5 units is 760. To find 1 unit would be to take 760 divided by 5. This will give me 152. So in this case, we know 1 unit is 152, which is how much Bianca have at the end. So to find how many beats did Bianca have at first, so we have to work backwards. So in this case, from the start, Bianca, she plus 38 beats, and then she ended up with 152 beats. So to find how many beats did Bianca have at first, we will have to take 152 minus how much she plus, which is the 38. So minus 38. And then you realize that she had 114 beats at first. So Bianca had 114 beats at first. Okay, next for question B, Aisha then used some beats for a project. She had the same number of beats as Catrice in the end. How many beats did Aisha use for the project? So for this question, we will first have to work out how many beats Aisha have and how many beats Catrice have. So in this case, Aisha have. So if you look at your model from part A, you realize that Aisha is 3 units. So if we know 1 unit is 152, so to find Aisha, it is just 3 times 152, which is 456. And then to find Catrice is just the 1 unit plus 20. So 152 plus 20, which is 172. So we know after Aisha used some beats for a project, she had the same number of beats as Catrice in the end. So in this case, Aisha will end up with 172 beats. So her original she started with 456 beats. So to find how many beats she used for the project would be to take the how much she have, which is this 456, subtract away how much she have left in the end, which is 172. So this will give me 284, which is your answer for part B, 284. Okay. Question 9. The pies at the bakery were on sale. 2/3 of the pies were sold in the morning, and 7/10 of the remaining pies were sold in the afternoon. In the end, there were 87 pies left. What fraction of pies were left? Express your answer in its simplest form. Okay. So we know how many pies were sold in the morning, a fraction of pies that were sold in the morning. And we know that 7/10 of the remaining pies were sold in the afternoon, and how much you were left after that. So in this case, when you see like there's a fraction of the remaining pies, in this case, you probably have to use your remainder concept. So in this case, we can draw a remainder model. So we use a part whole model here to represent the total number of pies. So we know 2/3 of the pies were sold in the morning, so we can cut our into 3 parts. And we know 2 parts. This 2 parts here was sold in the morning. So I'm going to label morning as M. And then what I have left, which is this 1 part here, it is my remainder. Okay, I'm going to shift this down a little bit. Okay, and in this case, we know for the remainder, 7/10 of the remaining pies were sold in the afternoon. So for our remainder, we can redraw it below. Okay, so we can redraw our remainder below. And we know 7/10 of the remaining pies were sold in the afternoon. So in this case, for our remainder, we can cut one portion for 7 units. And this is how much was sold in the afternoon. Okay. And then since you sold 7/10 of the remaining pies on the afternoon, how much you are left with would be this box here is a 3 units. And then this is how much you are left with. Okay. And in this case, in the end, there were 87 pies left. So what you're left with is 87 pies. Okay. So next, I'm going to compare my remainder portions here. Okay. This box here and this portion of my remainder here. So in this case, you know that what you have left is 10 units, and what you have in your remainder portion above, it is actually 1 part. So in this case, we need to make them the same first. So in this case, in order to make them the same, we need to find the lowest common multiple between 1 and 10, which is 10. So your remainder portion below is already 10 units, so you don't have to do anything to that. So in this case, for your remainder portion above, now it's on 1 box. So to make it 10 units, you have to multiply by 10. So the remainder portion will be 10 units. And then what you have for the morning portion is also 10 units for each box. So 10 units for each box here. Okay. So for part A, what fraction of pies were left? So what we are trying to find is what is left over your total. So in this case, what you're left, you realize it is only 3 units out of your total, which is 10 units times 3, which is 30. So 3 out of 30 is what you left. And then if you were to simplify, you'll be left with 1/10 as your answer. So in this case, for question A, it will be 1/10 as your answer. Okay. Lastly, for part B, how many more pies were sold in the morning than in the afternoon? So in this case, we look at what we have left, which is 3 units. And in this case, the 3 units that is left is 87 pies. So 3 units equals to 87 pies left. Then you can proceed to find 1 unit, which is 87 divided by 3. So this will give you 29. So 1 unit represents 29. So how many more pies were sold in the morning than in the afternoon? So if you look carefully, you realize that morning is actually you sold 20 units, whereas in the afternoon you sold 7 units. So how many more pies were sold in the morning than in the afternoon? So this represents a difference. So in this case, the difference between the units between morning and afternoon would be 20 units minus 7 units, which is 13 units. And then since we have already found 1 unit, which is 29, so 13 units would be 13 times 29, which in this case would give me 377. So how many more pies were sold in the morning than in the afternoon would be 377. Okay. Okay, we have come to the end of the paper. Thank you.